I made 8 years ago have not been kept. I think the record shows otherwise. We have gone from the biggest deficits 8 years ago to the biggest surpluses in history today. Instead of high unemployment, we now have the lowest African American unemployment, the lowest Latino unemployment ever measured, 22 million new jobs, very low unemployment nationally. Instead of ballooning the debt and multiplying it 4 times over, we have seen the debt actually begun to be paid down. Here are some promises that I'll make to you now. I will balance the budget every year. I will pay down the debt every year. I will give middle-class Americans tax cuts, meaningful ones. And I will invest in education, health care, protecting the environment, and retirement security. We both made promises in this campaign. I promise you I will keep mine. Let me tell you about one of the governors. He has promised $1 trillion out of the Social Security Trust Fund for young working adults to invest and save on their own. But he's promised seniors that their Social Security benefits will not be cut, and he's promised the same $1 trillion to them. So this is a show me state. Reminds me of the line from the movie, "Show me the money." Which one of those promises will you keep and which will you break, Governor?
Governor Bush?
Thank you for your question. There's an old high school debating trick, which is to answer something and then attack your opponent at the end. You asked about promises. You were promised that Medicare would be reformed and that Social Security would be reformed. You were promised a middle-class tax cut in 1992. It didn't happen. There's too much bitterness in Washington. There's too much wrangling. It's time to have a fresh start. One of the reasons I was successful as the governor of Texas is because I didn't try to be all things to all people. When I campaigned in a race, a lot of folks didn't think I could win, including, by the way, my mother. I said I'd do 4 things: tort reform, education reform, welfare reform, and juvenile justice reform. And I won, and I had the will of the people in my state behind me. And then I brought folks together to get it done. And that's what we need, I think, in this election. To me, that's what it's all about. I know, listen, I'm sure your 6th grade kids are listening. These guys will say anything to get elected. But there's a record, and that's what I hope people look at. And one of my promises is going to be Social Security reform, and you bet we need to take $1 trillion out of that $2.4 trillion surplus. Now remember, Social Security revenue exceeds expenses up until 2015. People are going to get paid. But if you're a younger worker, if you're younger, you better hope this country thinks differently. Otherwise, you're going to be faced with huge payroll taxes or reduced benefits. And you bet we're going to take $1 trillion of your own money and let you invest it under safe guidelines so you get a better rate of return on the money than the paltry 2% that the federal government gets for you today. That's one of my promises. But it's going to require people to bring both Republicans and Democrats together to get it done. That's what it requires. There was a chance to get this done. There was bipartisan approach, but it's been rejected. I'm going to bring them together.
Both of you, on this subject, there are other questions that also go to this. Skepticism, not necessarily about you, but all people in politics. Why is that?
Well, first of all, Jim, I'd like to respond to what the governor just said. Because the $1 trillion that has been promised to young people has also been promised to older people. And you cannot keep both promises. If you're in your mid-40s, under the governor's plan, Social Security will be bankrupt by the time you retire if he takes it out of the Social Security Trust Fund. Under my plan, its solvency will be extended until you're 100. Now that is the difference, and the governor may not want to answer that question. He may want to call it a high school debating trick, but let me tell you this. This election is not about debating tricks. It is about your future. The reason Social Security, he says it gets 2%, you know, it's not a bank account, it also that just pays back money that's invested. It is also used to give your mothers and fathers the Social Security checks that they live on. If you take $1 trillion out of that Social Security trust fund, how are the checks going to be? How are you going to keep faith with the seniors? Now, let me come directly to your question.
I think we have to go to the closing statements. And
well, can I answer that? One reason people are skeptical is because people don't answer the questions they've been asked. The $1 trillion comes out of the surplus so that you can invest some of your own money. There's just a difference of opinion. I want workers to have their own assets. It's who you trust, government or people.
Right. Now we're going to go to closing statements.
Right.
Vice President Gore, you're first.
Thank you very much, Jim, and I'll begin by answering your questions. Your last question. I believe that a lot of people are skeptical about people in politics today because we have seen a time of great challenge for our country since the assassination of our best leaders in the 60s, since the Vietnam War, since Watergate, and because we need campaign finance reform. I'd like to tell you something about me. I keep my word. I have kept the faith. I've kept the faith with my country. I volunteered for the Army. I served in Vietnam. I kept the faith with my family. Tipper and I have been married for 30 years. We have devoted ourselves to our children and now our nearly 1.5-year-old grandson. I have kept the faith with our country. 9 times I have raised my hand to take an oath to the Constitution, and I have never violated that oath. I have not spent the last quarter century in pursuit of personal wealth. I have spent the last quarter century fighting for middle-class working men and women in the United States of America. I believe very deeply that you have to be willing to stand up and fight no matter what powerful forces might be on the other side. If you want somebody who is willing to fight for you, I am asking for your support and your vote, and yes, your confidence and your willingness to believe that we can do the right thing in America and be the better for it. We've made some progress during the last 8 years. We have seen the strongest economy in the history of the United States, lower crime rates for 8 years in a row, highest private home ownership ever. But I'll make you one promise here. You ain't seen nothing yet, and I will keep that promise.
Governor Bush, 2 minutes.
Well, Jim, I want to thank you and thank the folks here at Washington University and the Vice President. Appreciate the chance to have a good, honest dialogue about our differences of opinion. And I think after the 3 debates, good people of this country understand there is a difference of opinion. It's the difference between big federal government and somebody who's coming from outside of Washington who will trust individuals. I've got an agenda that I want to get done for the country. It's an agenda that says we're going to reform Medicare to make sure seniors have got prescription drugs and to give seniors different options from which they can choose. It's an agenda that says we're going to listen to the young voices in Social Security and say we're going to think differently about making sure we have a system, but also fulfill the promise to the seniors in America. A promise made will be a promise kept should I be fortunate enough to become your president. I want to rebuild the military to keep the peace. I want to make sure the public school system in America fulfills its promise so that no child, not one child, is left behind. And after setting priorities, I want to give some of your money back. See, I don't think the surplus is the government's money. I think it's the people's money. I don't think the surplus exists because of the ingenuity and hard work of the federal government. I think it exists because of the ingenuity and hard work of the American people. And you ought to have some of this surplus so you can save and dream and build. I look forward to the final weeks of this campaign. I'm asking for your vote. For those of you for me, thanks for your help. For those of you for my opponent, please only vote once. But for those who have not made up their mind, I'd like to conclude by this promise. Should I be fortunate enough to become your president, when I put my hand on the Bible, I will swear to not only uphold the laws of the land, but I will also swear to uphold the honor and the dignity of the office to which I have been elected. So help me God. Thank you very much.
A closing piece of business before we go. The Debate Commission wants reaction to the 3 kinds of formats used in the debates this year, and you may register an opinion at their website, www.debates.org. Thank you, Vice President Gore. Governor Bush from St. Louis, I'm Jim Lehrer. Thank you and good night.
Good luck from here on.
And to you.